energy, and they will get you a link to that later. And let's go, ladies. Let's jump right in. So we're here talking about a mom's guide to an abundance of energy. Got our expert resident moms here with us, health experts also. And let's jump right in and start talking about identifying some of those foods that the body needs to supercharge energy. So I'm going to go over to Patty first. And Patty, before you jump in and start talking about this point, just briefly take a moment, introduce yourself, tell people who you are and what it is that you do.
Great. Yeah. Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm Patty Pickenich, and I'm from Patty Pickenich Wellness. I'm an FDN, which is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. And I help women recharge and get their energy back by looking for their missing pieces to their health puzzles. So I use functional lab testing and other ways to help women get their energy back and take back their life, because that's where I was struggling in my issues. So I look for hidden stressors, real answers to their health issues, and I ditch the fatigue and help them reclaim their life.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about your personal story as like a mom of three boys, and what
Wow.
was kind of like going on for you, like tell us a little bit about this journey that you've been on. Like what was happening and then like where you're at now, like you went from here to here. Like tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, yeah, it's a long story, so I'll try to condense it because as a kid growing up, actually, I always had really bad stomach aches, so I always knew there was something going on. But as progressively things got worse, I had brain fog and fatigue and adrenal issues really bad that I couldn't function as a mom of three boys. It was just really crazy how I would get up in the morning and I just had no energy to do anything. I just had to push myself through, which we all know is really not the right thing to do. I had two miscarriages in between my three boys, and I knew my hormones were off as well from what I know now. But basically, what happened was little by little, my body just kept falling apart, and I just kept pushing myself through. So it started in the gut, but then it manifested everywhere. I started getting migraines, anxiety, and the list kind of goes on and on. I had skin issues. So when anybody asks me, how did you fix everything? I always say it really goes back to the gut. I also was living in a moldy house, and so my three boys actually had some other issues. My one son had really bad eczema. My other son had some brain issues, and then my two of them also had stomach issues. So it was just wreaking havoc in the body. And what happened was we didn't even know it until we actually moved out. We did a big renovation in our home, and we dug underneath. We renovated the whole first floor, and we had a crawl space in there. And we had, just let me back up a little bit. We had testing done in our home, and they said there was no mold. And I kept saying, there's something going on in this house. I knew it. But when we did the renovation, it looked beautiful on the outside, but underneath there was the just mold underneath the floorboards in the bathroom and stuff. So again, like it was all manifesting. So fast forward, we actually ended up moving to Arizona for my husband's job, and we ended up going. I ended up still being sick, and I couldn't figure out why. So went to a doctor. They diagnosed me with mold toxicity and Lyme, and so I was like 80% better, but I just kept digging and researching, and then I finally found FDN, and that's when I really got the aha moment, the light bulb moment of saying to myself that you needed to look in the gut the whole time, because what happens is these toxins are getting into the gut, and that's what we call leaky gut. And just poking holes in the gut, I'm just going to make it really easy to understand. And those toxins are getting into the bloodstream. And that's when leads to autoimmune issues, which I had. I had also been to many doctors before that, and they just kept saying, everything's fine. Your blood work looks fine. So that's another thing that was a big red flag for me, is that I don't feel fine, but my blood work looks fine. So there's something else out that's going on. And then on top of that, when I did go to the doctor in Arizona, they just said they ran a blood thyroid, and all they did was a TSH. And so that's something else we could dig a little deeper into too. Is that
Mhm.
you really need to dig deeper in a full thyroid panel. But what they did was just kept upping my dose of my thyroid, and I really wasn't getting any better. It would just kind of be a band-aid, temporary
Mhm.
thing. And so I had to do all the research on my own, and I had to really fight for my own self. And that's why I call myself my whole program the Take Back Your Life program, because I really felt like a fighter. Like I just
Yeah.
needed to take back my life. Um, it was a long time of probably 20
Mhm.
years where I didn't have answers.
Yeah.
So it's so important for me to tell my story so I can let people know that there is hope out there and there are
Mhm.
things you can do.
Yeah, and I think this is such an important story to share because as moms, you guys know this is that, it is a tendency for moms just to push through no matter how bad they feel, right? Sometimes it's like kind of just accept that that's like part of the job, right? We're running managing the kids, we're managing the household, and there's more for you than that, as you know now, right? Like you still have kids, you still do all those things, but you have an abundance of energy, and that's what we want to inspire people about today. So there's a couple like really key things that you kind of mentioned there, Patty, that I want to circle back to. And one of the things is about like your house environment, and you specifically had mold, but we know here is like, health practitioners in this, kind of holistic, integrative, functional space that it can be mold, it can be toxins in the house, it can be a lot of other thing, environmental sensitivities. So one of the things that I just want to like point out to people that you said so that it sticks is that you were experiencing health issues and your kids were too. So there was a pattern that was happening there, right? So we want to look for those patterns in the household. I'm working with a client right now, similar situation is like, are we seeing like a pattern within the family where everybody is kind of like struggling with allergies or, getting sick all the time or energy or, ADHD and like all this stuff kind of like cropping up. And that's where we can get really curious about what is going on in the household, like in relation to environmental stuff or food stuff or other things, right? And with that, I'll also say that as somebody who's experienced mold myself as well too, my husband had zero symptoms, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes you're the canary in the coal mine, and whatever you're experiencing is not necessarily normal, right? So it just gets categorized, or we're told that it's normal. So let's go back to then a couple other things that you said. You said that you were experiencing brain fog, and there's a lot of moms or parents that might be listening to this and going, what is brain fog? I mean, I forget my keys all the time. That's normal. I'm just tired. I'm just busy. Or like, I forget. I mean, how many parents have forgotten to pick up their kids or almost forgot to pick up their kids, or they forget to like pack their lunch, and like, a lot of parents would just chalk that up as like it's part of it, just happens. So I would love for you to elaborate a little bit more and explain what brain fog really means and how that's different for you now. So what were like when you had brain fog, what did that look like? What was happening for you? And then how do you know now that you don't have brain fog anymore?
Okay, that's a really great question. I think the main thing is that your focus is off. You can't really focus, you can't concentrate, or you just go from one thought to the next. You're like, "Oh, what was I thinking?" Or when you're trying to complete a sentence and you just can't complete the sentence or stay on topic. And a lot of times there's a lot of things going on as a mom, right? And you have to be kind of laser focused because you have, you know, Johnny going here and Joseph going here, and this has to get done before they go to, play practice or whatever.
Mhm.
And you really have to have an organized mind. So I guess the best way to describe it in my mind is that it's just disorganized.
Mhm.
You're all over the place. And like you said, you do forget things, but it's not on a consistent basis. Like, I mean, once in a while, I think is okay. But, um, you know, to be honest, I don't know if forgetting your kid is not a good idea, but
It
but
happens.
you know, that, I can just say that for me personally, it was more of the going to like a ball game or something and just couldn't even focus. I just was exhausted and I was just sitting there and I just really just wanted to just, take a nap.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's like a lot of different components to it, I would say. And I think it hits everyone a little differently too.
Definitely. So you kind of like that brings me to my next key point that you said that I would love for you to elaborate on is you mentioned a term adrenal fatigue or adrenal dysfunction. And most people don't know what that is. It's very common for us to talk about as practitioners. So what does that mean for somebody? You didn't necessarily know what that was before you did all this lab testing and discovered that. So what are some kind of like patterns, symptoms, signs of that adrenal dysfunction that you were experiencing in this circumstance as a mom, like going through this, that others might be experiencing as well too, so that they can see the difference of like, oh, that's not normal. What I think is normal is not actually normal.
Right. Yeah. So so basically what happens is you're pumping out cortisol constantly and you're just eventually your body just can't do it anymore. It's that chronic stress that keeps cranking out the cortisol, and mold can do that to you too. So you could be doing all the right things, but if you're living in mold, that actually can do that as well because your body is under a lot of stress from that. And same with environmental toxins, but it can also be emotional stress.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a lot of things that can do that to your body. But basically, what happens when you're in adrenal fatigue or adrenal exhaustion is your body just can't do it anymore. You're just running at it. Like it's like the gas tank is on
Mm-hmm.
empty because you just
So
have to
what
keep
is,
pumping it out.
yeah, so what does somebody feel like? Like what is happening? Like what would they be experiencing in their day-to-day life that might be some indications that that's what's going on the inside?
I think two things that happened with me personally was the exhaustion, just being tired all the time. And one thing that's really was a red flag too is that little tiny stressors that wouldn't bother you before all of a sudden are like this big stressor. So, that's a huge red flag because you just can't handle the stress anymore. And again, like I said before, it was just the exhaustion. Like I
Mm-hmm.
might have a little bit of energy in my tank in the morning, but by 3 o'clock, I was done. And even before that, a warning sign is like that wired and tired feeling at night where you get like this little not a little but a burst of energy at night and you're just wired.
Yeah.
That's like kind of when you're on your way to adrenal fatigue. So I like
Yeah.
it to, we like to mention that as a kind of a warning sign as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
But a lot of people I think are also drinking their coffee first thing in the morning because they're exhausted, and that actually stresses the adrenals as well. Like having that on an empty stomach is causing your body to pump out that extra cortisol. So there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things that we can do, and there's a lot of different symptoms
Yeah.
of adrenal
Which I
fatigue.
think is like if we think about like some of those like that daily experience that somebody might be having, like that's like the experience of a parent, like parents just they're like, oh, it's just normal to feel tired all the time as a parent, or that second wind in the evening time, like in the parents that I work with, they're like, oh, well, that's when the kids are going to bed, so that's my me time, so I can get all the stuff
Yes.
done. But what's really happening is they're getting this second wind, which actually isn't necessarily normal. It's just been accepted as normal in society because so many people are dealing with these things. So let's dig into helping people identify the foods that their body needs to supercharge their energy, because that's a step in the right direction. So when you've got some of this stuff going on, whether it's mold or environmental stuff or adrenal dysfunction, like, how do we like start to move out of that scenario? How do we start to heal the body? And we know here that food is one of those tools to do that. So, what are some of the ways that you help people identify the foods that their body needs to supercharge their energy, which ultimately gives you the capacity then to like take, to do other things? So talk about how you help people identify those foods.
Absolutely. Okay, so first of all, I think the most important thing I didn't mention earlier was when I did the stool test, which is the gut test that I referred to. I found out that I had H. pylori and Candida, which can make all these symptoms that I mentioned. They all appear with those in your gut, and so that was a big aha moment for me because I had to cut out the sugars and cut out the carbs. So we're talking about foods that give you energy. These are foods that deplete your energy. Like when I say carbs, I mean processed foods. I shouldn't say all carbs, because carbs can be good, especially if you have adrenal fatigue. Sometimes you need some carbs. But for me personally, at that moment, I needed to cut out the sugar, and I needed to add protein. So the first most important thing I tell all my clients is to have protein first thing in the morning. To start your day with protein, not with coffee, but make sure you're having like 30 grams of protein, and continually make sure you're eating that lunch and dinner as well. And then you should also add healthy fats. Healthy fats are going to give you energy as well. So, something like MCT oil or coconut oil, olive oil, and those are really good healthy fats that are going to give you energy that you need, and it's going to fuel your brain. So that's the other thing. Omega-3s are really great for your brain. So salmon, those type of fish that have the higher omega-3s, that was super important for me. But in addition to that, and I don't know if this is where you were going with that question, but there was foods that were super healthy, like avocados for me personally. But I found on this it's a food sensitivity test that I personally use, but it's also shows your inflammation in your body. So it was causing inflammation in my body. So what it does is they pair the food with your white blood cells to see if it's causing inflammation. And this test, I had done other food sensitivity tests before, but this test was right on the mark. And it really showed me which foods were good for me and not good for me. And like I said, an avocado is super healthy, great fat, but it wasn't good for my body. It was causing inflammation. And like I described earlier, if it's getting into the blood and it's causing an immune reaction, that's what leads to the symptoms. So fatigue, or brain fog, and things like that. So what I do for my clients is I run that test. And that test is super important because it'll give you the foods that you just have to give up for a month or 3 months or 6 months, depending on the reaction and how high the reaction is. But it really supercharges your body because it's taking away that inflammation, that pain. I also had mentioned that I had migraines, and the migraines were gone once I started figuring out what foods were not helping me and which foods I needed to add more of into. So for example, like you'll have a list of good foods that are really great for your body loves. And just to mention also, something I always tell my clients is to get lots of colorful vegetables into your diet, because you're going to get different antioxidants from each food and each color. And a lot of people don't rotate their foods and don't add in different colors. And I think that's super important, that they're getting the different vitamins and minerals, because our body is operating on minerals and vitamins, right? We need those micronutrients as well. A lot of times they talk about protein and fat and carbs, but getting those micronutrients is so important for your body to work at the maximum level. Just like when you put gas in your tank, right? You need good, gas that's, not rotten, and, processed foods, all the things. I mean, I learned, as we'll probably get into this too, for my kids, was really getting them the nutrients that they needed to function at their best.
Right, right. I know I like have ideas already floating around in my mind about how you bring in color and incorporate kids, but we're going to get to that at the end when we talk about some of those simple strategies to navigate a busy like parent schedule and prioritize your success and health too. So we got a couple comments here. I love that you guys are engaging with us. People are saying that this is really inspirational to hear, Patty. Thanks for sharing your story. Jay Brogg says, my doctor says 9 months and I think you're talking about the food sensitivity stuff like elimination or avoidance, bringing it back in. And it really can depend for, everybody, like whatever your healing journey is and all the things that you're doing to help accelerate the healing process. Because food sensitivities is just one piece of the puzzle. Like Patty talked about the GI map, the stool sample test that we like. I'm sure we're going to end up talking about hormones. We talked a little bit about cortisol. So there's multiple pieces of the puzzle. And ultimately, you can be working on all the different, pieces of those puzzle to accelerate that healing process, and it can happen faster for you too. But let's jump over to Wendy. Wendy is a mom also. So Wendy, why don't you just briefly take a moment, share a little bit about yourself, who you are, what it is that you do, maybe some of the things that you see differently now as a mom, like, your past, like before you knew what you know now to like what it is that you know, and what some of that, like what that journey's been like for you as a mom, and helping moms see like, that there's an opportunity for them to feel awesome while still being a parent.
Thanks, Jen. And hi, Patty. Three boys. Wow. Bravo to you. That is not easy.
Thanks.
Really, really. So I'm Wendy Rosen, and I am a functional, practitioner as well, an FDN. But I help open-minded, continuous learners who are just absolutely hungry and ready to figure out how they can feel their best. And we uncover all of these things and figure out what is derailing their health. And I only had one boy, so and that was 27 years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. So I was working when I was pregnant. I worked down near the World Trade Center, and so I lived in New Jersey. I was commuting and screaming in the car, every day at 5:30 when there was all this agitation going on because I was going to be late and I needed to be on the trading desk and there was all this stuff. And then as I gained, while I was pregnant, I gained, I don't know, like 75 pounds. I'm only 5'2". And so I would waddle through the trade center and like, all of me would like finally get through the door. And what's interesting, like I look back at that journey and I kind of went into pregnancy. So I think it's really important to think about like where you are before you have the kids, right? Like where is your body? And so I was at like my perfect weight, but I was on some medication for depression. And every now and then I would smoke. And now all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I find out I'm pregnant and there goes all of it. And so the immediate, my pregnancy started kind of on the back foot. And and then I had all these cravings. So, I think I was in total dysbiosis when I was pregnant. Then I had all these cravings back, 27 years ago. So, my family would be like, hello, Snackwell,
Oh
hello,
yeah.
muffin. I had continuous sugar cravings. And then there were things that I really could not eat, like tuna fish, which I loved. So anyway, the point was that when I had a lousy pregnancy, I was sick all the time. And then when I actually gave birth to my son, shortly thereafter, I wound up with chronic fatigue syndrome. Like, I mean, back then they called it, I had mono and Epstein-Barr and, all of it. And so the reason I say this is like, where are you when you're going through pregnancy? Because, back then we weren't like testing to make sure that our microbiome was in shape and that we didn't have heavy metal poisoning. I mean, I think 30 years ago, it probably wasn't as bad as it is today, but like, we weren't taught to get in shape to get pregnant. To me, being
Mhm.
116 pounds, that was like enough to get pregnant,
Mhm.
right? I was in shape, but physically, and I had all the sugar and everything else. So it was a very tough delivery and blah, blah, blah. And then afterwards, I think the point was that my body was exhausted
Mhm.
and from working and then having the baby, and so I got sick right away. And you talked about, and the thing is I just had one kid, but I was still working. I had to go back to work after 2 months, so it was a very rushed thing, but I wasn't really feeling well and I still had that 2 to 3 hour commute and blah blah blah. So I say blah 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 because it's like all details that are not important now, but the point was that I was working all day and then I was coming home and then I was running home, commuting, trying to give my son a bath and read his books and everything else. And I think there's a lot of pressure, especially if you're a working mom, to get home to do these things. And you're in it all day. Maybe you're in it in your traffic, and then you're in it when you get home and you're like, oh. And I think over time, that's really, really wearing. So that would be the first thing I'd say is like, where are you? And did you
Mhm.
prepare your body for that, for the pregnancy? And I would say, like, after you have the first kid, I have a lot of friends who have 3 and 4 kids. I can't even imagine. And so it just like kind of escrows. And then when,
Snowballs.
when
Yeah.
you're, when your kids are younger, they're eating Cheerios and all kinds of other things. And of course, you're finishing their plates. And so you're kind of like, not in that healthy habit that you need to be. And
Mhm.
so you talked about adrenal fatigue. To me, adrenal fatigue was I would walk down the street, and if you feel like you could sleep anywhere, like on a sidewalk or a park bench, and you would be delighted you don't even care, that is adrenal fatigue. If you feel like bright lights bother you or your nerve endings are standing up, that's adrenal
Yeah.
fatigue. Those are the kinds of symptoms, like you said, very short tempered. It's not you. No amount of sleep helps.
Right.
You can sleep the whole
Yeah.
weekend and still wake up on Monday and you'll be exhausted.
Yeah.
So what I learned through that process in terms of foods, just to move along, was that when I didn't eat sugar, so, back then it was carbs and it was all about weight. It wasn't about gluten. But when I would, go through these periods, what I learned was if I didn't eat processed sugar and I didn't eat carbs and I ate very, very clean, just eating like more of a Mediterranean diet, then everything started to come back. And, I would make this distilled, terrible tasting green juice in the morning. But, anything that would kind of give me some energy so that I could get through my day and see my son and, run around the park and do all the things that boys like to do. Um, so that's kind of what I learned. I learned then that eating was critical.
Mm.
And I think it's hard when you have multiple kids because first of all, they're influenced by stuff in the school. They want to have snacks. And so to be really healthy, it's maybe not in vogue all the time, although more now it is. You're finishing their pizza. It's all kinds of stuff like that, like, because you don't want to waste the money on. So but I think you have to look at kind of where you are and where your body is and what it is that you need. And even if you can only find 5 minutes to just re-regulate or find 5 minutes to just plan your food shopping for the week and how you're going to get the nutrition, it's worth
Mhm.
it because you start to feel better. And slowly I got better, and then I was able to do my 16-hour days and get back to sleep and all of
Yeah.
it. And what you learn is that you have to learn your body.
Yeah.
Where's your body? You have to listen to your body. And when you eat something, if your energy goes down, it's bad food for you.
Mm.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Yes.
it's that simple.
Yeah.
Right.
Um, or when
Or
you
if you
eat,
feel
yeah,
anxious afterwards, or you're
it's bad.
hungry immediately afterwards, like our body is talking to us all the time. We're just not always listening, right?
Yeah.
And I want to say, like, we've got a couple comments here that I'm going to get to as well. Also, just want to remind you guys that we are recording and transcribing this. So if you want a copy of the audio and the transcribed notes for all the information that we're sharing, make sure you directly message one of these wonderful health experts here, Wendy or Patty, with the word energy, and they'll get you a link to that later. So, what I love about your story, Wendy, that I want to bring into light for everybody is one, like, there's no guilt or shame here, right? Like, we're all doing the best that we can in any given moment, and we only know what we know, right? And so, I think it's important to touch on this because parents can have so much guilt about what their choices are. But what we can look at your story, Wendy, and also then go, okay, here I am. Like, Patty, how old are your kids
Now
now?
they're 20 to 25,
Right.
so they're older,
Yeah.
but yeah.
So if we look at, like, even when kids are like 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 as they get older, and you're really struggling with that energy, some of that brain fog stuff that Patty was talking about earlier, we can reference back to like that pregnancy experience to go, yeah, like maybe my body wasn't in the greatest place to begin with. Like I had a kind of a rough pregnancy, for example. We can also look like when I work with clients, when we have a consultation, I say, I want to start all the way back at the point of your birth because, the way that you entered into this world can actually contribute to whatever you're experiencing in your body right now at the age of 40 or 50 or whatever that is. So there's this whole timeline, like this whole history of things that we can look at these patterns and start to understand, like, your body didn't just wake up overnight and decide to be low energy and dysfunctional in this kind of way. There's been an accumulation of things that have been going on. And that hindsight 2020 is so insightful, right? We can collect so much data and information, and we can start to pay attention to how our bodies feel. So, um, gosh, we've covered so much ground so far. I want to add a little bit about identifying foods to supercharge your energy, and then let's move into talking about like how we find the real answers to mysterious health issues with functional lab tests. We'll touch on that a little bit more, and then we're going to wrap up with simple ways to navigate a busy lifestyle, like Wendy was kind of already talking about, in order to prioritize your success and your health, right? So that you can have that balance of both. You can do both. We all do both here. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jen Maleka, the Holistic Health Boss. I help busy health minded professionals find the missing pieces of their health puzzle so they can actually fix whatever's going on and get back to feeling like themselves again. I have worked with many parents who have experienced a lot of what these women have shared also. And like that short temper of like, you just snap when your kids aren't listening or whatever, like that's not normal. You don't have to live that way. We don't have to feel bad about that, right? Identifying the foods that are right for my body was a key turning point in my own journey as well too, of getting my energy back, maintaining my ideal health and weight. And it's something that I focus on with my clients. So food sensitivity testing is a big part of that puzzle, like Patty was saying. And somebody here was asking, what food sensitivity test are you referring to? So I really love to use a test called the Cyrex Array 10, which is looking at antibodies, like your body is producing antibodies against food particles because those food particles have crossed the intestinal lining into the bloodstream. And so then the immune system is like, what is that foreign thing doing in here? And it's attacking it. It's eliciting the inflammatory response of the body and creating inflammation. Patty, I think you use a different test. So what is the food sensitivity test that you were referring to earlier?
It's the MRT 176, and like I mentioned, it's pairing your white blood cells with the actual food to see what's causing inflammation. And it really, like I mentioned, I had tried a bunch of different food sensitivity tests, and this one really knocked it out of the park for me because, like I said, it helped me with my migraines and it helped me with my fatigue. So I really trust it. And what's even a little bonus, whenever my clients use it, they usually drop like 3 to 5 pounds immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Start it.
Yep.
So that's always a great just way to start the program, and which I love. I just also want to mention that I actually worked at 7 World Trade Center before I got into all this. So that's just so funny that you mentioned. So I worked in there, and then I had the same thing when I had my son. I was working and trying to juggle it all. It's really hard, and I'm thankful that I did when I had the 3. I wasn't working at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that,
Yeah.
but we'll get into all the strategies I had for that whenever you want.
And MRT is a great test. I've used that plenty of times myself too. That's how my husband figured out that he was actually sensitive to beef, which we would think, grass-fed beef, we all can agree that that's a really healthy, healthy item, but he had a food sensitivity to it. It was creating a lot of inflammation. He cut out beef and he lost like 5 pounds in a week of inflammation, right? So it is really significant with that. I see FH360 Health Detective is mentioning a book, Good Energy. I love this book. I personally know Casey and Kelly Means, what they're doing, the work out there that they're doing, lobbying for healthier foods for our children and a change in the healthcare system is absolutely phenomenal. And the other thing that I wanted to mention while we're on the food topic, to truly understand like the impacts of processed foods, is I would love Oh, there we go. Happy Wednesday, Instagram fam out there. Excited to be jumping on and talking about how moms